define a little more closely mirror and reflection, because they do seem very close. Mirror is a reflection, let me put it this way. A reflection can be distorted, is not always exact. The mirror principle is an exact repeatability at level after level. The reflection is the fact that there can be a reflection, but it is always off key a little. It's distorted in some manner, but still the pattern is there. What I wanted to just briefly refer to is this imperfection which shows up in the fact that there is a Deus Faber, there is a creative principle, but may contain a kind of imperfection. And one of my favorite examples of that is told in the text known as the Midrash, in one of the Kabbalistic, the Jewish texts, in which Isaac asks God why man is not pronounced good. This, of course, is the fact that there is, in the Bible, we have that after each creative process, there is the statement that God pronounced it good when he created the heavens and the earth and all of this. And so Isaac says, but when you created man, you did not pronounce him good. Wherefore, O Lord? And the story goes that, of course, God answered Isaac, because in those days there was a closer communication with the divine, you say. And God says to Isaac, because man I did not create complete, but I gave him my laws by which he would complete himself. And this, of course, is this pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy, that we must win our immortality, that we complete the creative process, you see. And so it is not complete, and HPB makes this very clear, that we advance the whole creative process by reference to the laws which we have available to us. Well, there's another wonderful motif, an archetype of the creative process, which is the image of creation as a sacrifice. And this, of course, we find in many, many myths. It's a wonderful archetypal motif, as though something has to die for the new to be created. In Chinese mythology, creation becomes a kind of murder. I was reminded, too, during the break of the fact that in Babylonian mythology, Tiamat is indeed divided up, and various parts of her body. One has this in Norse mythology, the primeval giant Ymir, from whose body the world was shaped. From the flesh, the world was formed. From his blood, the billows of the sea, the hills from his bones, the trees from his hair, the spear of heaven from his skull, and so on. This we have in the concept that's given us in the Secret Doctrine of the archetype known as the heavenly man, in which each of us is a portion of this archetype. In certain Jewish traditions, it is said that the first man reached from one end of the world to the other. In Hindu cosmology, we have the original, the divine, primordial man, Purusha, cut up in the act of creation, and so on. So there are a number of these myths that indeed are that of sacrifice. Then there is an archetypal feature that cannot be overlooked in the whole aspect which concerns what we might call the mood of the creative process, the mood of the creator, if you like, which is that of thirst, or in the Hindu tradition, tapas. That is to say that there is a certain desire that arises, a hunger, which sorry, I'm tangled up here. There is a certain thirst, the sense of loneliness that arises, and we get this in many myths, this waking up and finding oneself all alone, and you want company, as it were, this thirst or desire. And this is closely connected with the concept which HPB develops, that there is a brooding, there is a tapas, which is brooding, giving warmth to an inner feeling. This is, in our own creative process, sometimes you sort of brood over an idea before you express it. Anyone who's a writer or a painter or a musician, I expect also, you sort of warm it, so to speak, and this is tapas. In connection with that, and incidentally you get this in many yogic texts in India, you get it in many Gnostic texts in the East, and I think it's akin to the scientific model of creation as a big bang, an interior heat that builds up to the point where it explodes, And sometimes you get filled with something, don't you? And you say, I'll explode if I don't get this out. I have to write a poem, or I have to paint a picture, and I'll explode if I'm not able. Or, maybe you go out and cook a meal because you need this expression in some way. And so closely connected with that is, of course, the archetypal motif of the germ or egg. There is a kind of brooding that produces the archetype of the egg. Creation is a meditative concentration of thought which hatches the world egg. And you get this also in the Secret Doctrine, the Hiranyagarbha, as it's called in the Hindu. In one of the Upanishads, you get this image. In the beginning, this was non-existent. It became existent. It grew. It turned into an egg. The egg lay for the time of a year. The egg broke open. The two halves were one of silver, the other of gold. The silver one became this earth, the golden one the sky, and so on. So this egg is a tremendous archetypal symbol, and we retain it in the rebirth, which is Easter, is a new birth. And one of the great symbols of Easter is the egg, the Easter egg, isn't it, you see? So you get that very much. Closely associated then with this is the archetypal motif of separation. The egg breaks open, and there is the separation of the yolk and the white and so on, the silver and the gold. A division in the primal unity occurs. A division occurs. The egg is split, and usually with a space in between. In occult cosmogony, we have this in the Secret Doctrine. Father, mother spin a web, and the separation of spirit and matter, you see. Now, the upper end is spirit, the lower end is matter, so to speak. But it's a web, it's a whole. This leads us, of course, to an element that is present in mythology, very much in many myths, and I put it with separation, and that is number. So that while there may be an original two, number may now proceed. And it's rather interesting to see this. You can count it as a separate one if you like, but I think that it's, perhaps we should put it as a separate one, because not only the separation, but the archetypal motif of number itself. So that while the primordial separation is into the opening of the egg into two, the unity is divided, then number comes in. And HPB, in the Secret Doctrine, gives a great deal of attention to this. She points out, for example, that Number symbolism, she says, is a sacred science, important in the study of occultism. And she adds, it is on the hierarchies, that is, these whole division of separation of the elements, and the correct number of these beings, invisible to us except upon very rare occasions, that the mystery of the whole universe is built. And this question of number is very, very interesting. Numbers, for example, are assigned to atomic structures, aren't they?
Can you tell me where you got that from?
Her statement? Yes, it's in connection. Where did I get her statement? It's in connection with what to me is the very central shloka of the Secret Doctrine in the division, and that is in stanza 4, shloka 3, and in fact it's page 89 of volume 1, on the hierarchies and correct numbers of these beings, that the mystery of the whole universe is built. And she gives this, you see, that now we have this awakening from the effulgency of light, the ray of the ever darkness, sprang in space the reawakened energies. The 1 from the egg, the 6 and the 5, then the 3, the 1, the 4, the 1, the 5, which of course is indeed the marvelous number, the numerical hierarchy, she says, which is of the value of pi, 31415, which is the relation of the diameter to the circumference of the circle, which is always inexact. And here comes reflection, because it's always an inexact relationship, isn't it? You see? So that the appearance is never the absolute, the absolute repeated, you see. But it's always an inexact ratio. This whole matter of number is very interesting because there are peoples who count number symbolism in a variety of ways. For example, in one of the very interesting works by one of the Jungian scholars, Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz, has a fascinating book on number and time. Not an easy book to read, but a fascinating book on number and time. She points out there are different ways that you can count. There are different ways in different cultures. We may count, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and so on. You see different things. Or there is another way of counting. The 2 is the 2-ness of 1. 3 is the 3-ness of 1. 4 is the 4-ness of 1. That there is only 1, and all numbers are but aspects of that 1. Which, of course, would be closer to the theosophical concept, wouldn't it, you say? We're not separate. We're all aspects of the 1. Now, connected with that, of course, that archetype of number, is indeed the motif of chains or generations. And numerous myths list lengthy chains of generations of gods. In the Secret Doctrine, for example, we come on such terms as the army of the voice. And she speaks of the host of the Logos. And indeed, on page 94 of Volume 1, HPB puts, the esoteric theogony begins with the 1 manifested, therefore not eternal in its presence and being, if eternal in its essence. The number of the numbers and numbered. It is from the number 10, or creative nature, the mother, the occult cipher or not, ever procreating, that the whole universe proceeded. A very mystic statement. We don't have time to really explore it, so think about it. But it's these chains, you know, in the Bible we have all the begats of the Old Testament, which are, if you follow her principle, that there is the logogrammatical method of reading, in which every name has a meaning, and every letter of every name has a meaning, then the begats refer to the whole hierarchy of beings that are the creative energies at every level. A real study to be made then of what these names really mean. And so then finally we have a motif that happens to be one of my favorite motifs, and it's the motif of failure. And you may say, well, why is that a motif in the creative process? Because it appears that in almost all mythological tales, there are abortive attempts. There are attempts at creation which do not quite succeed. We call them failures. We have this portrayed when we come to the anthropogonic process, volume 2. There were efforts of Earth to bring forth the human. And we have all sorts of interesting figures that may turn the student, the reader, off, may say, oh, I don't like that, goat men and watermen, terrible and bad, and the dog-headed men, and the men with fishes' bodies. These are mentioned in the early stanzas. These are mythological references to the fact that nature unaided fails, that consciousness is necessary. And every mythology has reference to abortive efforts, efforts which have to be destroyed or which result in the creation of giants or dwarfs. And science, human or biological science, also records numerous failures, the production of monsters. Cells go wild, you see. And this very often they act in unpredictable ways and so on. So these, in one sense, are, if you keep these in mind, these great motifs, you begin to refer many of these statements to the fact that we are dealing with a great myth, the myth of our origins. And we see it reflected in consciousness. We find it also reflected in language in numerous ways. But what we have been given then is a basic formula, the cosmological process. And HPB gives this through these 7 stanzas. And I think just sometimes reading one of the stanzas awakens in us some interior knowing that you can't define. But they are a basic formula. And so every student can find his own terms for these stages. I have developed my terms for them. And so with this as a kind of background, we can begin to see these 7 stages in the cosmogonic process. And you may give them your own names. I give them the terms. I think it's fun to play with them, really. And we've often had students do this to suggest how you would look at what word would you pick for each of the stanzas. The first stanza I call naught, because there is a condition in which there is no thingness. Naught was. Time was not, for it lay in the infinite bosom of duration, and so on. And one finds this throughout the first stanza, that one begins, as it were, a new creation. Now, it's not as though it's completely empty, but all the various existent things were not. And I say it's not as though it's a blank sheet, because there is, of course, all of the fruitage, if you like, of the past system that will now come out. What are called the seeds, the sishtas, the seeds of the past. But which ones will be nourished, which ones will flower, that's another story. We can't go into it, but we begin with this not was. The 7 ways to bliss were not. The great causes of misery were not. For there was no one to produce and get ensnared by them. So not was, you see, and again and again. So this in a sense is this possibility. The possibility is there. The second one I call not yet. I hyphenated. I think it's an interesting, and it's a slightly different stage than the not stage. And again, we get this, her heart had not yet opened, the hour had not yet struck, the ray had not yet flashed into the germ, and so on. Now, what does that give you the sense of when you say not yet?
Expectancy.
Expectancy, doesn't it? And some people may want to use expectancy there, or some other word. But it gives you the feeling that something will happen, doesn't it? The notness is a kind of deep sleep, isn't it? A real slumber. And yet every possibility is present, but not yet. There's an excitement, isn't there? There's a tension, and the tension is building up then, you see, in it. The third then, because that tension is there, is expansion. And one finds this in the third stanza then. There is an expansion. The mother swells, expanding from within without. And this, of course, is one of the fundamental tenets, again, fundamental principles of the occult or esoteric philosophy. All growth is from within outwards. Nothing is added. It's not an accretion from without. And one sees this in the seed. When the acorn goes into the ground, and germinates, it's from within outwards that the push is made, isn't it? It's not by adding more earth or more water or more sun, but the urge is from within. And this is true with the egg opening. There may come the pecking from without, but only when there has been a movement from within. So this is a fundamental principle, is expansion, which is from within without. The moment there is expansion, there is then differentiation. And one gets this in the fourth phase. As you move out, as you expand, differentiation begins. And here we do have the reawakened energies. I've just read that shloka earlier, shloka 3. Shloka is the word for verse. It's usually called shloka of the stanza. Then the 3, the 1, the 4, the 1, the 5, and so on. The army of the voice. There is a differentiation now. Because once it has expanded, one begins to differentiate. And here comes then the principle of reflection, you see. So there is now a differentiation taking place. From that differentiation, the fifth one, I call it condensation. There may be, again, other words you want to use. But I think what is meant is that as these differentiate, they begin to solidify, to harden, as it were, to condense, and they become sort of, shall we say, hard pellets of ideas, a strange term. But there is a kind of, well, I can only call it condensation. I was trying to see a phrase that is used, but perhaps that's the best. The bodies are formed. Forms come. Real forms now from this stage of differentiation. Now, when you have condensation, then you can have formation. You can see this in your own creative processes, I think. You begin to see that this is, while this is a universal pattern, it also applies at every level. So the sixth I call formation. Now things begin really to take shape, to take different forms. And then there arises what the seventh, which gives the pattern then for man himself, sentiency. And it's interesting how the seventh stanza, behold the beginning of sentient, formless life. So now, with forms, life now can infuse them, and we have then the whole pattern that is now possible at the physical level here, so that the spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohat. That is to say, that now it has taken form, now infused with life, that form can now move about and do a variety of things. That gives us then the whole cosmological or cosmogonical process. It gives us the theme, I think, that the stages for the whole manifestation of a system, and the stages as they will be reflected in man. Now, one of the interesting things, as I say, is that HPB gives these in 7 stanzas. But she tells us, you see, midway through the 6th stanza, that some 11 stanzas have been omitted. And that, to me, is very interesting. We don't know how much else has been omitted. But why did she give 7? Because there are indeed 7 stages to the cosmogonic process and to the human process. But in volume 2, she does not separate the verses or shlokas in the same manner. She will say stanza 1 and shloka 1, 2, 3, but in the second volume, we'll look at a bit tomorrow, try to comprehend all of it in one session. She numbers the shlokas consecutively. Here in volume 1, for example, each stanza begins over again with shloka 1. 1, 2, 3. Stanza 2, 1, 2, 3, etc. Stanza 4, 1, 2, 3, etc. Stanza 7, 1, 2, 3, and so on. In the second volume, they are numbered consecutively, and there are 49 shlokas or verses given to us. So the stanza number in the second volume, I suggest, is irrelevant. Man then becomes the reflection, 7 times 7, and he is said to have to awaken 49 fires. This again is not easy. This is difficult. I'm just throwing these ideas out at you to explore for yourself. But the anthropogonic process, therefore, is that multiplication of 7 times 7, and 49 verses or shlokas are given to us. I'll emphasize this again tomorrow. Well, there's a little time now for questions. Ernest.
Could we go back a bit to the archetypal motifs where you mentioned
Yes.
mirror?
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you give us a relationship between that and Fohat?
Oh, yes. Yes, the question is a very interesting one. A relation between the mirror principle and Fohat. Fohat is a term which HPB uses, which, for those who may not be familiar with it, Fohat is the term which she says is Tibetan. Now, no Tibetan scholar will acknowledge that it is Tibetan. I should point that out, so don't go around saying it, because if you come up against a Tibetan scholar, he'll say it is not in any Tibetan dictionary. I think, therefore, that it was a mystic word that she learned in her own training. And since she learned it in Tibet in her own training, she assumed it was Tibetan, which is perfectly all right. We have no exact English equivalent for that term. I call it the dynamism of the universe. I don't know any better way to describe it. She says it is the link between mind and matter, the link between spirit and matter, that is that which bridges. It's a dynamism which at one end, as it were, produces the life energy, and at the other end, its form, or what we call matter. It's It's enshrouding, it's enveloping. So, it is the dynamism which enables the mirror principle to operate, I would say. That is to say that there is from the very beginning cosmic energy, if you like, cosmic force, an energy, a dynamism, which enables the operation of this principle to a mirror principle in which there is a repeatability at every level. So I think it's inherent in the universe. The very beginning of the manifested process, the very beginning of a projection, the very capacity, indeed, to project, is that dynamism, which is Fohat.
How would you feel about the fact of saying that maybe it's analogy-wise with the carbon?
An analogy is carbon.
Yeah.
Yes.
The analogy of Fohat could be carbon, like you could duplicate it.
You can duplicate, yes.
If you did a carbon copy.
If you get a carbon copy, yes, that's right. Which is not a reflection, but it's a carbon copy, yes. And this is the process, and Fohat is the energy, the dynamism that makes that possible.
Could be electricity.
Well, that is one form of Fohat, is electricity.
Could be thought.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't equate it with thought, because that...
Before thought.
It's before thought, yes. HBB has some 300 references to Fohat, in case you want to look all of them up, in the Secret Doctrine. And she does at one point indicate electricity, heat, light, cosmic electricity, yes. She calls it cosmic electricity, not as we know it. Heat, light.
Could you use prana?
No, it is not prana. No, it is not prana.
It's before intelligence, isn't it?
It's before intelligence. It's not prana. In her esoteric papers, she indicates that there are three forces, if you like, in the manifested system, which are non-interchangeable, and she says, for our particular period, which is known as a manvantara in the technical terms. Three forces that are non-interchangeable: Fohat, prana, and kundalini. And then she says, esoterically, these are all sons of Fohat. So I say there is Fohat Jr. from the father, because they're all sons of Fohat. But Fohat is the dynamism of the universe. Prana sustains the universe, is that life energy sustaining it. Kundalini is the transformative energy. And so one can begin to see something of their activities.
Could it be para-atma?
I would not equate it with that. She has it at the very beginning. If you read the first fundamental proposition, you will see. Do not equate it with any. It has its reflections, yes, it has its reflections at every single level. Certainly, and in man, its reflection is indeed psychic energy. It is that motivating energy, if you like. It's the dynamism.
Another word that you brought in was chaos. Now, could you fit that in your picture?
Yes, the unknown is always chaos, you see. And today it's interesting that there is a science of chaos that is being studied in universities even, and mathematically worked out. And the mathematics of it is known as fractals, which frankly I don't understand at all, because I don't have the kind of mind that deals much with mathematics. As far as I can go is keeping my checkbook balance. And if I had any more money, I probably wouldn't. It's a good thing I've never had very much to worry about. It's easier to keep it balanced when you don't have much money anyhow. But the mathematics of chaos is known as fractals. Now, chaos is a very interesting word. We have, unfortunately, here's where a word has taken on the wrong connotation. We have used it for meaning confused, and we say things are in a chaotic condition and so on, meaning confused condition, mixed up condition. But chaos originally was equated with space. And HPB, incidentally, has a very interesting section, and I think it's in the second part of the part 2, I believe. She has a very interesting, yes, it's in part 2 on symbolism, chaos, theos, and cosmos. And I can recommend that to you. It's a very fascinating section. But chaos originally in the Greek had to do with space in which everything was possible. Indeed, the word that is closest to it in contemporary language is the German word gähnen, which meant to yawn. Now, when you yawn, and you can all go ahead and yawn if you like. When you yawn, there is breath present. Motion, in other words, is primary. And it is that pushing out that is present in the yawning, that everything is possible. There is no, there's an original sound in yawning. This is the original, shall we say, sound of the universal process, if you like, the sound of reality. And this, incidentally, is said to be the only characteristic we can say of that original fabric, which is called akasha. Its very nature is that of sound. But in the yawn, all vowels and consonants are present, and it's only when the limitation of the various functions of the vocal cords, the hard and soft palate, the tongue, the labials, the lips, and so on, create then the patterns within it that give it definition. So chaos is that abyss, which is both the plenum and the void. Space, which is both plenum, both full and void. And so it is the unknown, because one can say nothing about it.
It's difficult to...
And so all myths start with a kind of unknown, which is chaos. The original unity which underlies all manifestation. And very difficult to define.
You said that the fortuitous concourse of atoms led to an ordered universe. But this
No, it does not. It does not.
Is from our point of view.
No, it does not. I never said that it led to... a fortuitous concourse of atoms will never lead to an ordered universe. And you see, this is what HPB says was one of her aims, to show that nature is not a fortuitous concourse of atoms. And I said that this is very similar to saying that an explosion in a print factory will produce the works of Shakespeare. It never does. It never leads to an ordered universe, a fortuitous concourse of atoms. So you're misquoting me, Bill.
Well, it isn't that. It's that the 19th century scientists postulated the fortuitous concourse of atoms, and to us, it's what you call an ordered universe.
That's right. This was the state of science of her time, was that there did not seem to be an ordering principle. The scientists of her day did not, by and large, except for the very rare exceptions, recognize an ordering principle underlying the process of a manifested system. And this is what she said, that there is an ordering principle underlying, which of course was in direct contradiction to materialistic science of her day. There's much more of a recognition that today there is an ordering principle. The work of Rupert Sheldrake, for example, that there is a morphic field, there is a form-producing field, you see, that there is indeed an ordering principle which is meaningful, that the universe is meaningful through and through. This is much more consonant with the science of today, but it was certainly not consonant with the science of her time.
I've heard that chaos is also churning.
Yes, it is. In the Hindu mythology, one has the churning of the original matter. And that churning produced a condensation which made again, this is a metaphor. Think of it only as metaphor. And one has the great Hindu mythology of the churning of chaos, which produced then the possibility of forms arising. Just as when you churn cream, you begin to get lumps, don't you? And the first lumps, and then they will come together and more, and ultimately you end up with butter, don't you? And you get this very much in Hindu mythology, yes. But it's only a metaphor, and that's why myth is so helpful, because they're all metaphors. And it's incredible the way in which language operates. It's not the thing, and never mistake the word for the thing. It isn't.
And Subaro also called Bohad, the Holy Ghost.
Well, I don't know that Subbarao ever used that term, did he? I'm surprised at that, because he was a Vedantan above all, and would not have used a term like the Holy Ghost.
I think he knew.
I doubt you'll find it in his philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, because above all, Subbarao was a Vedantist, as I said yesterday, and did not use Christian terms. Well, thank you very much. So tomorrow we will look at